Hello, 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 everyone, and welcome. We're doing a special, Lead with Impact Vision to Victory. It's a workshop that I'll be working with Dr. Andrea Clark on, and how we're actually going to lead in today in 2025 in a lot of different areas and answer some of the critical questions that we have when it comes to healthcare leadership. And around that, what no better person to bring to the stage someone who has lived this type of experience, can answer these kinds of questions. And we want this to be as interactive as possible. So, our audience, if you're joining us on LinkedIn or one of our other platforms, please put your comments into the chat area so we can answer your questions real time. This is an opportunity for you to get to know us, for us to get to know you, and to answer some critical questions. So let's bring her to the stage. We've got Dr. Andrea Clark. How are you today, this afternoon?
I'm well. Thank you so much for asking. It's always a pleasure to connect with you, Grant, and especially our fellow healthcare leaders and professionals and STEM professionals in the field. So thank you for asking. Happy to be here.
Thank you. I want to give just a little bit of background, a little context. Some people may not be aware of your background in some of the different healthcare institutions that you have worked with. Just give us a bit of an overview, the high level overview of Dr. Clark's adventure.
And it is an adventure. I like that you use that term, but I have well over about 25 years in healthcare, scientific research, and executive leadership at this point. I can't believe how fast time has flown by, but definitely I started off very young, early 20s in the field, started off in a very entry level position as a hospital transporter, just kind of making my way in the healthcare arena. I moved over into hospital from the hospital transporter to working more in the technical spaces with gastroenterologists, pulmonologists. Then I moved over more into that clinical setting, working with specialized surgeons and things of that nature, and running back office clinical work, flu vaccination clinics in the family medicine space. After that, I was able to pivot in my field, and I got the bug for scientific research, where I was able to do a lot of molecular genetic research, and moved on to Howard Hughes Medical Institution, where we worked on mycobacteriophages, which is kind of synonymous to tuberculosis research. After going into that more bench research arena and getting a good exposure of that scientific research, I transitioned over into laboratory medicine. So now I'm at the National Institute of Health, located in Bethesda, Maryland, at the Clinical Center, where I'm working kind of hand in hand with scientists and other global health leaders in the laboratory medicine setting from all parts of the world. NIH is a fantastic experience in campus. So I learned a lot there, picked up a lot of great mentors and friendships along the way. As I was reconfiguring the processes and systems of the client-vendor relationship at NIH, I was then able to gain leadership responsibilities with Mayo Clinic. In that space, I was deemed to take the model that I created at the National Institute of Health in the laboratory reference lab setting, and then basically replicate that throughout the United States, where Mayo Clinic, based in Rochester, Minnesota, where we had client vendor partnerships. So I basically spearheaded a new department for Mayo Clinic, where I was able to launch various laboratories throughout a multitude of hospitals throughout the United States, bringing my team in, hiring, managing the operational process, streamlining processes in different environments throughout the United States as an executive leader with Mayo Clinic. And now my work is more, I'm a business owner working as the founder and CEO of Upskill, where we thrive in educating our health and STEM professionals by creating a global community that supports their continuous education and growth. So we have work here, right here in Florida, all the way to Africa and reaching other parts of the world.
You've been doing a great job. That is a wonderful journey and a story. What we're doing, what we're working together on, we're doing a workshop for healthcare leadership, especially here in South Florida. And that's going to take place at the medical campus at Miami-Dade College, January 24th, 25th. But what we did was we did some research. We've been working on this for the last 8 months or so. And we said, what are some of the critical questions? What are the questions that people have that we feel that we can begin to give them some information around, even outside of the workshop, to give them some value? So one of the big questions, and I was surprised that this was at the top of the list, and I know someone as yourself who has navigated healthcare leadership, what do you see as the most significant challenge healthcare organizations face in retaining top talent today?
That's an excellent question. And I think this challenge is ongoing of what I've experienced when I was working, boots on the ground in healthcare in different arenas, and even with top healthcare executives in leadership and what we see today. One of the most significant healthcare challenges, I think, definitely is retaining top talent. And today is addressing the pervasive burnout that's in our workforce. As we know, the pandemic amplified a lot of the existing stressors that's ongoing in the healthcare community. And many healthcare professionals are now still grappling with mental and emotional and physical exhaustion. So while short-term incentives that we used to use to retain talent, like offering nurses sign-on bonuses or offering pay that can help in a monetary way, these incentives are now just table stakes. And we have to be more intentional of addressing the real root of what's causing burnout and also high turnover rates in our departments.
That's important. And I'm glad you said it just like that the landscape is changing. That what worked before doesn't work now because of the situations that have occurred. What has changed? Skill nurses now. I know, especially during COVID, is that you were working at one institution. Now you become a travel nurse, and you were in demand. Big money was on the table. So what are you going to do? How are you going to retain somebody when you can't really even compete? From a compensation level. But we also found that what's causing people to leave organizations, right? A lot of times because they don't feel valued. They're not being, no one's speaking to them at a level which they feel like, their voice is heard. And we've got to make sure that we make changes around in those areas. And you brought up the burnout question, which is kind of a buzzword. Yeah, right. But it's real. It's a pressing issue. I want to know, in your experience, what are the less obvious signs of burnout that leaders should look for within their teams?
You're absolutely right. That is a big buzzword. But when we really dissect burnout and what that really means, it is definitely a pressing issue that goes far beyond the obvious acute signs like fatigue or just absentees within the work organization. We want to pay attention to the less obvious signs that leaders may see within their team or that they may see in their peers in other leaderships, right? So that's typically when it comes to burnout, you're going to be less creative, right? Team members, you want to watch out for team members who was once full of ideas, innovative approaches, always have their hand out to jump on a project, but now they're kind of withdrawn a little bit more. They're not as attentive in meetings. They're not necessarily as engaged in our brainstorming sessions, right? Another key thing that you want to look for is the emotional detachment. Watch for these shifts in their demeanor. So a lot of times employees may appear indifferent, kind of disconnected, even in situations that would really typically excite them in a normal setting, right? So it's paying attention to your tribe, paying attention to the people in the organization, because we all have a cadence, we all have a rhythm, we all have our unique value that we bring. And then if you see some disruption in that, it's a good time to offer a safe space, right? To really check in with your employee to see, okay, I noticed that you don't really collaborate as much. You're a little, less creative as you was 6, 7, 8 months ago. And really open yourself to offering real authentic check-ins with your people in your team.
So you're saying take a pulse, understand changes in behavior,
Mm.
and start just like, you know what, let's ask a question, not to be intrusive so much.
Yeah.
So they feel like they're being watched more or less, but make it sort of like an open door type policy.
Yeah.
So like, hey, just talk to me. Just tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
So then you can address whatever elephant could be in the room, right? There's
Yeah.
an elephant in the room.
And
Like,
and
what is that?
it's something I did with my team early, because I managed, like I said, over 30 laboratories throughout the nation, all from my home office at the time in Washington, D.C. So how do I keep them engaged when they're so far and in so many different areas? How you start is typically how you finish, right? So I didn't start off as this cold leader. This is what we do, and this is what I hired you to do. I started off kind of tapping into who they were, their vision. And, so whenever you see that disconnect, it's not coming out of left field that all of a sudden now you're interested in, chronic criticism or disconnect. They know that, hey, Andrea, she was very involved in kind of getting to know me, to a certain extent. So she's just kind of being consistent in who she is. So you got to start a lot of these genuine conversations pretty early, right? I call it the honeymoon phase.
I like the honeymoon phase, right? Everybody loves the honeymoon phase, until you get into the real blocking and tackling of the
Reality.
marriage, right? It's a whole nother thing. And you brought up some really good points around the role of leadership in the well-being of your team, and what does that really look like? And you're leading by example. You've given us one example already, because you're fostering a culture. Not like how you just said you knew this, like let's set the stage early, so they understand the playing field. Because when you start changing even leadership style, we talk about, hey, I'm watching my team, but now are you watching yourself? Are you changing? How are you behavior? Like before, maybe you had more of an open door, maybe now not so much. Because we have found that when it comes to burnout, and when it comes to retaining, or you're losing some of your workforce, the things that are causing that may be the way that the department is being managed. What changes have occurred? Talk to us about your role of leadership and well-being.
Well, I could say, in all honesty and transparency, in my leadership role when I was executive national director at Mayo Clinic, I did not always practice good self-care, right? I had a big task, a big role. I'm building a national department that was never implemented before in the organization. So it was a lot of nuances that I had to create in the process. So I don't recommend this, but my motto was no days off, right? We have a job to do and we have to execute. But what I learned through time and experience, you have to, as a leader, right? People don't, it's an age-old saying, people don't follow what you say, they follow what you do, right? So when I'm on one of my national calls and my throat is, inflamed, and I'm still trying to talk through the hoarse voice, that's showing an example that I'm not practicing what I preach, right, as a healthy work-life balance in my own life. So I say that to say leadership first starts with you, how you lead yourself, right? Because you never know who's watching, right? So you want to model healthy behaviors in your own leadership style with yourself first, right? We all know whenever what they teach us on the airplane, if the airplane is going down, you put the mask on yourself first, right? So leadership prioritize first their own work-life balance, taking breaks, using their vacation time, openly discussing their mental health challenges to normalize what it looks like, feels like to seek support, right? And when people see you navigating in that type of space of transparency and vulnerability, it taps into that human connectedness within your team and your peers to show that hold on, he or she is still executing, but they still have good, healthy boundaries within their self. And we also want to, this is an emphasis here, is to offer more flexibility in the organization. Even though, we've went through the COVID pandemic, we are never the same, right? It's a such thing we have in science, it's called cellular memory, right? So we remember those treacherous times during the pandemic. And a lot of us was pushed home and work a remote. And it's hard to go back to the office and status quo, right? So now we realize we can get a lot done and be more flexible. I was actually reading an article of McKinsey and Company where they said 60%, 63% of surveyed nurses ranked flexibility as the most effective initiative for their well-being. And 86% said it's the key reason that they stay in an organization and or in their current position.
Those are important factors. The data doesn't lie.
Mm.
Typically, they take surveys, it goes across the country. There's a similar feeling and experience throughout, especially in the healthcare world. You're just coming off just an incredible amount of stress through COVID, right? That crushed everybody because you have when the healthcare system is overrun with the normal volume of people, it stresses everything out.
Mm.
All the resources that are necessary to make these things happen. So when it comes to what I call resilience in the workforce, you got to realize what you've asked your people to already do. And now you're asking them to do more about that. So what does fostering resilience truly look like in a practical sense for healthcare teams?
Yeah. If you would have asked me this question maybe 5, 10 years ago, I would have just said mental toughness. You just gotta, that's my personality type.
Tough it up.
You just have to have a growth mindset. You just have to be mentally tough. But the more experienced, seasoned leader in me now, I realize it's not so black and white. I think emerging professionals in the healthcare, when we go in, and especially if we're aspiring to new roles, we tend to, in our mind, fantasize what that would look like, right? If I'm a nurse, I want to go in, I have a heart to serve and health with healthcare, right? And passion, helping these patients basically come back into their normal healthy state. Or if I'm a doctor, I fantasize that. Or even if I'm a leader, I fantasize being in that position of power and leading structure and processes. But I think as seasoned professionals, it's our responsibility, not necessarily to pop their bubble, but to really have some real conversations so they can have a more holistic outlook of what that means when you say travel nursing. And we're not just talking about, oh, you get all this incentives and you get all this money. Traveling is taxing. Going into different hospitals, I did it for many years. Every hospital has its own culture. To acclimate to that is a whole nother mental toughness you have to have, So really getting more transparent to the real realities of these positions that our professionals are in can help them better prepare and providing them with the skills to navigate various situations can provide a lot of resilience and wherewithal in their particular industry.
Great answer. Great answer. That's going to be very, very helpful. We've got people paying attention. They're listening to you, Andrea. And we've got Chiadi has a question. She put into the chat. Thank you, Chiadi, for doing that.
Thank you.
What are your thoughts when it comes to employee burnout and balancing it with self-accountability? I like that.
That's good. And I mean thank you, Chiadi, for the question. And I love that she put there the self-accountability, right? I'm just gonna be honest. I was a work warrior, right? My motto is I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? Because I had to get a job done. But I realized that my yeses were expensive, meaning when you say yes to something, whether the organization needed, whether your patients, whether your team needed, on the inverse side of that, you're saying no to something else. And you really have to measure the pros and cons of that. So when I'm saying yes and I'm traveling and I'm in 5 different states a week, yes, I'm getting the job done, but I'm saying no to rest. I'm saying no to, replenishing myself in different ways. So you have to really be more self in alignment with yourself to really say, is this, what am I saying yes to? And then on the inverse side, what am I saying no to? And really have a real good hard look between those two to make sure you're really in alignment. And that's going to give you a lot of balances to know that your yeses are expensive. It comes
I
with a
love
cost.
that.
Mhm.
Yeses are expensive. Know your true worth, know your true value. Understand that time, you can always get more money, but you can't always get more time. We all have a finite amount of time. There's only 24 hours in a day for everybody. Use that time wisely, right? And when it comes, something you just brought up, I want to dive into that. And that's about around retention strategies. This is around a strategy
Mhm.
because we all got to retain our energy, retain our resources, retain our people and our
Mhm.
teams. Just like a car, if you lose one of those tires or one of those wheels, you're not going to go very far,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Right. So, what are your proven strategies that healthcare organizations can implement today to retain their best and brightest talent, especially in such a competitive market?
This is a great question, and this is something we definitely go more into on strategic framework and approaches with our lead with Impact Summit, today's summit that we have coming on. But I know it's a lot of different frameworks, it's a lot of institutional barriers there, but sometimes what we really have to do is get back to the basics, right? And the basics are really connecting with people, right? We have our AI, we have our digital reading, we have these goals and objectives, but a lot of times it's getting back to the basics. Since I've transitioned running upskill now, I still have my team reaching out to me, thanking me for their inspirational leadership years from when I first encountered with them. But I think the difference in my strategy is informal check-ins and really fostering authenticity. Everybody likes to be seen, valued, and heard. And I just go back to that. How you start is how you finish. And as a leader, you have a lot of power of creating a certain environment. And I know it's very hard to balance because your to-do list is long and is ever growing, but really checking in with your team sooner rather than later, especially with this younger generation where they're typically going to have a career like 6 to 8 different careers in a lifetime. You have to give them some visibility, some real authenticity, and checking in and making them feel more inclusive in a supportive environment.
Man, all these are important. We're starting to get some interaction because we've got to talk about these things. If we don't talk about these things, they don't get changed.
Mhm.
So we're always running against status quo. We're running against the critical mindset, right? We're running against bias. But if we don't stand up to these things, they don't change. And so this is so important when it comes to retention, when it comes to burnout, but it also around passion. People are in healthcare because they have a passion around it. They want to help people. And we don't want to put barriers in a way that stops that from happening. Because we all know as time is going on, especially in the United States, we've got such an older population. There's going to be more and more people needing healthcare that never was before. So the volume is only going to increase. I want to now address just adapting to change.
Mhm.
The healthcare landscape is always changing, but what skills or mindsets should leaders cultivate in their teams to help them adapt and thrive in a shifting environment?
That's a really big question. You can go in so many different ways, so I'll try to keep it as simplistic as possible. I think adaptability, just being agile, I think that's just always a win-win when it comes to leadership or just as a professional working in an ever-changing, rapidly changing environment with information coming to us at every minute and second of the day. We have to kind of get away from that. As we know, we get in a hospital setting, it is a big business organization, but we have to dismantle that kind of cog, you're another cog in the wheel type of approach when it comes to leaders. So they should actively, as I say, recognize the employees and not only recognize the employees, but recognize them as valuable stakeholders who has meaningful contributions that drive our organization and success forward, right? So it's kind of putting a third eye there outside of your role as a leader, but really saying, how does this person's assets line up and how am I communicating that to them so they know that they are valued in this organization, right? And also what we can do as you're adapting in your leadership style, you can have learning round programs, continuous education. That's what we do a lot with upskill, is continuously educating them, pouring into their growth and allowing them to feel seen and valued. And not only that, valuing and supporting their growth. So when it comes to a leadership style, we want to also focus on where do you, this is something I used to ask all the time to my team. What leadership style do you prefer in order for you to do your best work, right? So that kind of lets me get to know how you will respond to me. Okay, I need someone that really defines strong communication skills so I'll know my role. I need someone that really helps me, supports me in areas and give me feedback when I'm weak. So I take mental notes of that after asking that question so I can show up in my best self to serve their needs, to bring out the best in them as a leader.
I love that. I think you may have answered the question that we have in the chat from
Okay.
Anita. Anita Barbaro, she writes, what have you found is the best, most effective way to communicate to your teams that you care and you value them?
Yeah. Like I said, people can feel authenticity. Just by nature, I like to see people win, right? So I think you can always kind of feel that with me. So, like I said, kind of and I know more of us millennial leaders, we can be a little informal in a formal type of way at the same time. It's just kind of generationally how we show up. So, like I said, Anita, starting it off in a very authentic way and supportive way is the best way to do that. And as I said, identifying, because as a leader, you have to know where your team plays as far as their strengths and their weaknesses. So really identifying their strengths and really communicating with them how it's aligning to the overall mission and the objectives. Because sometimes they may not see that. Sometimes they may think, oh, I'm just showing up to work, doing this job, and nobody sees me. But it's nice to pull them to the side and say, you know what? I really like how you executed X, Y, and Z. And that in turn, that helped us on this end in leadership, have a more efficient process. So giving that informal feedback is very helpful and it keeps the momentum and the morale going in the organization.
Awesome. Well, she says you definitely have answered that question. We're coming to the end here. We've only got about a minute or so,
Mhm.
but the call to action around this, and let us know more about Lead with Impact, what you've got coming up, and why this is so important for you.
So, as we said, it's a lot of hot topics when it comes to things that's going on in leadership, in the healthcare arena, and we always want to show up in a significant way. When once you've gotten, so many promotions, so many degrees behind your name, it's a time for you to turn the mirror on yourself and really look at your purpose and really why you are in this environment, right? Because we all of us want to have some type of significance, right? And that's what we're doing here with Lead with Impact Summit. These are a 2-day summit where we're giving you applied information. Myself, as a strategic leader, Grant McGaw, coming in, talking about that real executive presence, and then our CFO, Latasha Barnes, coming in to give us that real financial acumen. And not only are we giving you the skills and how to apply it, we're putting it in a case study scenario. So then you can pretty much have a seat at the table on day 2, and we really interact with each other as thought leaders as we navigate different urgencies of empowering other leaders and driving meaningful change. So at the Lead with Impact Summit, we'll delve deeper into actionable strategies for combating burnout, building supportive work environments in our boardroom simulation.
This is wonderful. Well, this has been great. We are at the bottom of the hour, I would say, at 3:30. I want to encourage the audience again to tune in on Tuesday. We're going to have another one of our lives. We want people to get as much information as they can as they look toward not only being a part of our workshop, but ongoing. We want to create a culture in which we can have these kinds of conversations so we can all get better at what you do. I want to thank you again for joining us, Dr. Clark.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome.